Okay, I'll do our karakia again. Karakia whakatimata, whakataka hau ki te uru, whakataka hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ke uta, kia mātaratara ki tai, he hiaki ana te ātākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhunga, tihei Māori ora. Nau mai, haere mai. It's my pleasure to welcome all the submitters and our panellists to this meeting today, to our third submissions hui. And in many ways, I'd like us to see that we have all of our panellists here. I'll start with, I'd like to introduce them. Sue Bradford, former Greens, Stevie Chadwick, former Labour, Ria Bond, former New Zealand First, our wonderful kahurangi who's made this all happen and possible for us, kahurangi Dame Marilyn Waring, Ian Dalzell, former Labour, Lynn Pillay, former Labour, Jackie Blue, and Belinda Vernon, former National MPs. So without any further ado, ladies and submitters, I would like to thank the submitters for these submissions. I want to acknowledge that this kaupapa is very dear to all of us, and I do wish to remind everybody that we're not under parliamentary rules, so we're not protected under parliamentary privilege, hence we're all open or defamation, so just go kia tupatu or go carefully through our submissions. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen and panel, I would like to call the first submitters. Submitters, please note that we have read your submissions and that you have, I think it's 15 minutes to present your submission. Please note that we do have a timer on, and that please do try and leave some time at the end of it for questions from our panel, and these are very important. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to on Ryall from the former Tertiary of John.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks for letting me appear. There's a problem with my camera, and I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you, but can't see you.
I see some nodding heads. Look, firstly, apologise that Peter Cranny was meant to be with me today. He's had a long history in this area. He's had an urgent court hearing he had to go to, so it was just me. My submission is largely from my long experience with care and support workers, which goes back to 1982, and the research I've done, certainly in preparation for the Bartlett case, went back a long way beyond that. The care and support workers, as I said, have got a long history, and they missed the equal pay round in the 1970s because they weren't really recognised as workers, and they only actually got their first national award in 1980, which was not shortly before the awards disappeared. If you go back and historically, the arguments in the 1970s, when they were trying to unionise and get an award, was that they were really not workers. They were there volunteering or getting a little bit of money on the side. And there were some amazing arguments in the files that were presented to the arbitration court about why classically women's work, which they were doing, was really an extension of their home skills, although they didn't even recognise those as skills really, but female attributes. So they are from a sector which is a classic sector for that pay equity process. And when we took the case, I was then the National Secretary of the Service and Food Workers Union for Christine Bartlett. Even at that point there, when we first put the claim into the court, their employer tried to have it dismissed immediately as vexatious and without merit. I've been involved since that time, obviously getting right up till today. The changes to the Equal Pay Act 1972, which this government has made, are obviously outrageous for a whole lot of reasons, not least of which the process they went through to deprive care and support workers from a say through a select committee process and otherwise around the changes and what they meant for them. At that point, when these changes came in, there was a case in the Employment Relations Authority in which the care and support workers were asking for their pay equity rates to be set, or fixed as they call it, by the Employment Relations Authority. That was discontinued by the amendments to the Act, and that was a major disappointment and a long history of disappointments for this group. Just in terms of my submission, the main points I wanted to make about the recent amendments is the merit or arguable test. I was on both those the working group on the pay equity principles, both the first group and the second group, and the second group actually considered the experience which we had been through since between 2017 and 2018, because the state sector got a bit of ahead of the game once the Bartlett case was settled, and some were already in process, and we looked at those and we thought there's a lot of time being taken in around this issue of merit, and we should actually get into the process and do the assessment and the work after that. So that's why arguable was chosen, and I think it's still valid. There's also an issue about the employer opt-out, which for this group in this sector is obviously there's about 1,000 employers, so you really require the whole group to be in. They're funded from a single source largely, and this is the part of the confusion also between the Employment Relations Act and the Equal Pay Act is when we set up the working party on pay equity principles, the Business New Zealand was insistent that we had to stick to the same line as the Employment Relations Act in terms of the process for collective bargaining. Now, with the latest amendments, they get actually confused between these two. And so they've still got following the Employment Relations Act, but they've designed different things. So I don't want to go into it in much depth here, but if you look at those good faith provisions in 13C2, which you're required to follow, and 13C1 says you've got to follow the Employment Relations Act. 13C2 actually dreams up some good faith principles which are not in the Act. And so I think there's a lot of technical stuff that's happened due to the rush and getting these things through. The review process is another point that I wanted to make, is that without reviews, really, like the care and support group, you have a one-off settlement, and there's no way of maintaining it unless you've got a review process. And that needs to be fairly regular to make sure that that happens. In terms of the care and support 2017 settlement, we really even didn't see that as a pay equity settlement because the changes to the Act weren't in force. We said in the agreement of the parties, which was the government, the employers and ourselves, is that we just saw it as a giant step forward for wage justice for care and support workers. We didn't really couch it in those terms. It was only the heading of the Act, which we wanted to make sure was enforceable, that actually said it was a care and support Workers Pay Equity Settlement Act. It was largely a settlement of a litigation rather than a pay equity case. We didn't really look at any comparators. We just chose something which we thought sounded okay and looked okay, and the members could ratify. That needed to be updated, and certainly it got left behind with the subsequent pay equity settlements, mainly in the health sector with healthcare assistants and other groups that we did look at very briefly when we were settling that case. Well, I think the review process for this group would not occur now till 2028 because one of the groups, the mental health support workers, the community mental health people, wasn't settled to 2018. It sort of piggybacked on the 2017 settlement. So that leaves a big gap between when this group was able to initiate for a pay equity process in 2022 and 2028 will be the first time that they can relook at that. They're going to go through the whole process all over again, even though they've done it once in 2022. The rest of that is in my submission. I had some recommendations at the end because I think that in reflection, we didn't make a major mistake in not having a process where it was easier to get to the courts or the authority. Because when you're in the funded sector, largely the employers don't want to settle anything unless they know the funding is there. The funders don't want to do anything unless they know that the employers are complying with what they want, and it's pretty hopeless in terms of a process. And I think this would be certainly a sector in which the court or the authority, I'd prefer the court because the authority gets a bit lost about what their expertise on what to do about this, in which the evidence is presented, the previous work is done, which for this group was largely consensual between the employers and ourselves about the comparators. The evidence is presented to the court and someone makes a decision which is binding on the parties, which would have more force with the funder rather than us trying to engage with an employer group which is trying to delay things before they get the green light for funding. The work the previous government did in terms of the cabinet papers around process and milestones tried to solve that issue, which is trying to say to the funder, you're not actually involved in the process. You just need to make sure the process is robust. But finally this broke down because once they saw the figures which had come out of this, they then decided that the process had not been robust. They wanted to go backwards again. So I've got some recommendations at the end about what should happen around that. The Public Service Commission Pay Equity Unit was great. That was one of the highlights of this process. And the amount of work they did and the amount of files they have on various comparators is like gold. And I'm not sure what's happened to that, all that material. But that
Kia ora, John.
Yeah.
Kia ora, John. Aroha mai. We're running out of time. Sorry, I gave you 15. I was only supposed to give you 10 minutes.
But, finish.
Enough time to have a couple of questions from our panel. Do we have any questions from... Oh, there we are, Leanne. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Yes, John, I just wanted to say thank you for your submission. It was incredibly enlightening, and the way that it went through all of the issues that were raised in the Christine Bartlett case was phenomenal. I guess I hadn't appreciated, and I did know that the Rest Home Award didn't start until 1980, but that puts it in a different light to, I guess, the case that springs to mind with the female meat packers in Wellington, when they didn't have a male comparator in their award, they were able to gain a notional male rate and then lift their pay to that. And so you've really missed out on the Equal Pay Act being applied as it was intended to be applied back in the 70s, because there wasn't a national award, because this work wasn't regarded as work. It was domestic work. It was for PIN money. Basically was the summary of what I took from your submission.
That's correct. I agree with all that.
That was a quick answer.
Yeah, no, well,
to a very long question.
Yeah, the histories are very pertinent to this group.
Very.
You're right.
Thank you.
Well, my microphone's on, so I'll speak next. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. John,
One more then, and then we'll have to close it off.
Okay. John, I agree totally with what Leanne said. A really good submission, easy to follow. I just want you to reiterate why it is not appropriate to treat a pay equity settlement as a one-off adjustment, and then for it to continue to be maintained through normal collective bargaining processes. Why is it not appropriate to treat it as a one-off settlement and rely on the other systems to keep it maintaining its relevance?
Well, firstly, this was a settlement that covered everyone in that sector, and collective bargaining only exists in part of it. And so you would want a settlement if you had something like a fair pay agreement or something that was mandatory across the sector that you were bargaining around. That would be fine. But it's complicated by two things. One is that, and one is the role of the funder. And so I don't think it's possible to do it simply through collective bargaining, because there's not the structures there to do it.
Kia ora,
Okay,
John. Thank you very much for your response. We do have other questions lined up, but we're running out of time. So if I could ask the panel to please forward your questions to Amy or Anna, and can we forward those to you for maybe a written response later on, John? Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your submission.
That's fine. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, John.
I'd like to call on our next speaker, Jim Rose. Are you there, Jim?
Can you
there
hear
you are.
me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I'll start my submission remarks. Hang on. What's this? Camera on. Hang on. I've just got another instruction to do something. All right. Right, here we are. Okay. Thank you for listening to my submission. This submission is in my personal capacity. I'm a semi-retired economist. I'm actually submitting in favour of the Pay Equity Bill 2025 because it is a welcome pushback against judicial mischief. Lost my screen again. The Pay Equity Act 1972 was obsolete decades ago. Later employment law amendments and human rights amendments outlawed sex discrimination. The 1972 Act had a convoluted wording to navigate an award system that provided for separate job titles and pay rates for men and women. It was a creature of another time. The 1972 Act was left on the statute books as a monument towards a major step towards equality. No one anticipated the court's shoehorning a G-rated version of Marx's labour theory of value into the 1972 Act after it had stood mute for 40 years. As Judge Richard Posner observed in a 1986 US Appeal Court decision, a decent employer who behaves with complete honour towards women will, if they lose a pay equity case, would have to pay back pay despite the fact they paid the going wage and couldn't afford to pay more. A pay equity finding condemns them as a discriminating employer. Such damnation needs a strong social justice rationale, especially if an employer did nothing out of malice or bias. Pay equity is a mid-20th century notion from when the gender wage gap was suspiciously large, especially in the USA, and there was no progress towards closing that gap for several decades. The pay equity litigation originated in the USA in the 1970s when sex discrimination was in your face and often a majority viewpoint. Legal restrictions barring women from being recruited or retained in professions in the public service were recent memories. The job classified ads back then had male and female sections. It was not uncommon for job ads to say whether women could apply. Hang on. The pay equity hypothesis is well-qualified women are hired less by employers in the higher paid occupations and industries. To find jobs, they must crowd into the few industries where they are more welcome, with their sheer numbers flooding in to push down their wages. Times change and we must change with the times. Pay equity has been overtaken by events. Many major technological changes frequently trump culture and have induced enormous changes in behaviour and beliefs on the family. Attitudes and behaviour regarding family size, marriage and divorce, care of elderly parents, premarital sex, men and women living together, having children without being married, and gays and lesbians underwent profound changes in the past 60 years. There is now next to no gender pay gap in New Zealand for the majority of workers, and women are just dominating educational achievement. Such success by women in higher education was never imagined 50 years ago when pay equity litigation first gathered steam. Pretty soon, most labour markets employing graduates will be 60% or more women, and therefore female dominated according to the old pay equity legislation. There are too many anomalies in the gender wage gap for it to be mostly caused by sexist employers discriminating against women in hiring and forcing down their wages. The main drivers of the gender wage gap are unknown to employers, such as whether a would-be recruit is married, how many children do they have, and how many years between the births of their children. Spacing out of births of children is a major driver of the gender pay gap, but this information is unknown to employers, so they can pay these mothers less. Why do earnings differences by sex expand so greatly with age? Why do the women without children have higher earnings than women with children? Why do the former's earnings almost equal those of comparable men? Why do employers stop discriminating at all against women who have husbands or partners who earn less than them? Women over the entire run of the 20th century and beyond often ended up in the jobs that reduce the career cost of family, but they rapidly changed course when new opportunities emerged. Up until the 20th century, mid-20th century, women invested in becoming a teacher, nurse, librarian, or secretary because these skills were useful across different workplaces, did not depreciate much during breaks to care for children. When expectations among young women of still working at the age of 35 doubled after the 1960s, there was a massive increase in female investments in higher education and more specialised professional training. The discussion in my submission of the power of the pill in changing.
Kia ora, Jim. Sorry, we're quickly running out of time for your submission. As you know, the panellists have read your submission, and I'm sure that there are some that are putting their hands up now that would love to ask you some questions. Are you okay with that?
No. Okay, if you wish.
Yes, I think we should go to some questions. Lynn.
Yes, thank you for your submission. Look, you state that pay equity isn't about anything an employer did wrong, that they paid the going rate, that nonetheless a pay equity finding condemns them as a discriminating employer, and it would have made them liable for 6 years back pay under the old legislation. such damnation of a discriminator needs a good social justice rationale, especially if his employer did nothing out of malice or bias. Are you aware that the framework under the 2020 amendments did not frame pay equity settlements as damning an employer? Rather, it provided a platform for them to work together. I mean, are you really up with the play with the legislation, I have to say? Most of your evidence seems to come from America. Are you aware of the New Zealand pay equity legislation? Because you seem to be missing the boat a bit.
The original legislation did. Then there was a series, but even with the 2020 legislation, as I recall, there was a possibility of a final resolution by the Employment Relations Authority.
Well, I don't agree with you, but I won't hold up. I think there's other questions.
Kia ora, Jackie. We need your mic on, Jackie.
Sorry, apologies. Thank you, Jim, for your submission. I got to the sort of a second paragraph or so. Unfortunately, I had to sort of rethink what you had said. You commented that the 2025 legislation did not disturb the 12 pay equity settlements already approved. We've heard from submitters that that is not the case. The CTO, for instance, stated that all settled claims were altered by the 2025 Act and that all review processes were voided. That's pretty significant for a law to reach back and alter settled claims. In fact, Dame Sylvia Cartwright was outraged at the retrospective nature of the 2025 Act and it undermined key legal principles such as fairness, legal certainty and the rule of law. Just would like your comments to that, please. Is Jim there?
Jim? Hi, Jim, did you get that question?
You broke up, then I dropped out, so I didn't actually hear the last question.
Okay, Jim, very quickly, you state in your submission that the 2025 legislation did not disturb the 12 agreed pay equity settlements already approved. That's not the case. We have heard that the 2025 Act actually reached back and voided all the review clauses in those 12 settlements. And James Sylvia Cartwright on the first day was pretty outraged at the retrospective nature of the 2025 Act and that it actually went against the legal principles and the rule of law. Just appreciate your comments on that.
Did you hear that, Jim? No. Where's he gone to now? I think what we will do, Jackie, if you don't mind, shall we put that in an email to him?
Sure.
That'd be the best way, since it keeps
I've
falling
dropped
off.
out again.
Yeah, that's okay, Jim. What we will do is, because time is marching on, why don't we just send the question to you for you to respond to Jackie's question? Is that okay?
Yeah, broke up completely. I can hear you, but I couldn't hear Jackie.
No, that's okay. We'll put it in a one of the girls will send it to you in an email. Okay. Thank you very much for your submission.
Okay.
Thank you.
Breaking up again.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Next is Katherine Ravenswood. Katherine, with us. All righty. Do we have? Okie dokie. Oh, there she is. Kia ora, Katherine. Please note that The panellists have read your submissions, so you have 10 minutes. We will call it in about a minute beforehand, if not sooner, when you're ready to finish, if it's before that, to take questions. Thank you. The stage is yours.
Tēnā koutou I ngā wahine toa o Te People's Select Committee on Pay Equity. I'm speaking here as an academic with extensive research expertise and policy and practice roles as an academic within the care and support sector. As you've got my written submission and read it already, my intention is to be very brief and just provide an introduction so that you can then ask me questions. So the current government has taken punitive actions on pay equity, and the government that has done that is led by the same political party who settled with support workers in 2017. Their approach now, while significantly harsher, is the same design as they dealt with care and support workers from that initial legal action taken. Their response to women's gaining in power, worth, and mana has been instead to increase their own control and to suppress women's progress towards gender equity in work. Their actions deliberately remove power from women and other workers. Their actions have punished those who only sought what they deserve. The changes to the Equal Pay Act 1972 passed this year favour an economic model of small government in terms of financial and employment and social responsibility. And this government follows that easily at the cost of those whose work is incorrectly valued and incorrectly rewarded. The pay equity process that has now been removed created change that challenged the government's control and power as the state. We saw wages increase significantly for many women. Some previously somewhat adversarial relationships between employers, workers, and unions became more collaborative, and employers and society began to truly recognise the contribution of women to our labour market and economy. That progress is anathema to a government hell-bent on a blindly neoliberal project that only deregulates in favour of the government and profit, yet seeks to have more control over those, such as women in women-dominated occupations, who are already disadvantaged. The changes passed to the Equal Pay Act 1972 this year represent changes and a government that have no desire for gender equity in work. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Katherine. Questions? Dame Marilyn?
Kia ora, Katherine. Thank you very much for your submission. This is something I'm asking experienced academics because of the critiques of the process for establishing the pay equity claims. So in your experience as a researcher and in supervision of postgraduate research, and your familiarity with the process of establishing claims, the qualitative and quantitative data, how rigorous do you think that process is?
It is very rigorous. The process that has been undertaken includes identifying people and training people, workers themselves, to interview and to really kind of start again and understand what the skills and knowledge that are involved in the particular occupation subject to a claim are. And I think that's best practice for research and research-informed policy. It's saying we think there is something amiss here. Let's do our very best to kind of start at the beginning and try and unpack what might be happening if we take systemic gender discrimination out of the equation. I think other submitters have spoken to the time, to the goodwill, to the money involved in this process. It is not undertaken lightly, and it is taken undertaken very carefully and very rigorously.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Phoebe.
Thank you, Katherine, for your submission. Just in your evidence and your research, you point to a change in behaviour now that may be occurring about asking people to work reduced hours or actually increasing their workload, which puts them under pressure. Is there much evidence about that happening in your research, Katherine?
The research that speaks to was from the first Settlement Act in the couple of years after that was implemented. But what I have heard since then is that there haven't been a lot of change to those patterns. And I guess we can think about those as really being financially or economically driven. In care and support work, when the Settlement Act was implemented, and it was, and John spoke to the kind of complicated multiple layers of regulation. It kind of added top-up funding specifically for the increased hourly wages, but that was on top of an already underfunded sector. So I think I cannot verify through research that right now those patterns are still happening, but I think from that research I did earlier and some since, and what I hear from multiple stakeholders, that if for no other reason than in order to be able to continue their work, employers may well be taking some of what could be deemed to be shortcuts.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Sue.
Oh, kia ora, Katherine. Thanks so much for making such a clear and interesting submission. I just wondered, given the kind of academic and long overview you have of this, do you have any thoughts about what was just starting to open up with the first private sector pay equity claim being started recently, and what might have been possible in the private sector with this had the government not just slammed it into the ground, and where that might have been going with private sector claims?
I can only give an opinion on that one.
That's fine.
I think, but based on my knowledge over some time, it is a shame that they shut down private sector claims, and it's kind of contrary to some of the values that they espouse, actually, particularly around allowing the labour market to operate as it wants. I think it would have, that could have been the test of how much gender equality and fair work is important to our society and to the way we run business. I have no idea how that would have panned out and over time. And of course, we often see that the louder employers, at any rate, also tend to change their behaviours a bit depending on the ilk of the current government. But I think it's a huge shame that that has been stopped. If nothing else, it might have given grist to this current government's mill, who knows? But we could have actually seen what happens. We could have seen, and I think this is missing in so much of what's happened, is that apart from the select committee, that society in general hasn't really had the chance to debate this. The government is assuming that fair work, that pay equity, is something we can't afford and that we're willing to sell out in favour of profit and of businesses surviving. So I think it's a huge shame, and maybe we could have had some of that debate and seen what happens when private employers have to deal with this too.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you.
And the last question, Jackie.
Thank you, Katherine. Lovely to see you.
You too.
Human Rights Commission Value of Care report reviewed the effects of pay equity settlement on care and support staff, and they found possible gaming by employers. What do you think is driving that behaviour?
I think there's two things. So in my submission, I spoke to how complex gender discrimination and systemic discrimination is. While recently, particularly in the care and support workers, in the sector, employers have actually been on the side of the unions and workers. That is relatively new. So potentially there's still some of gender discrimination really feeding into underpinning those attitudes and behaviours of the employers and the gaming. So immediately after that 217 settlement, managers, nurses, and some other workers in general did not really appreciate that the increased wages were for the work that was being done the way it was done. They thought, we are being paid more, the support workers have a pay increase, therefore they should take on more responsibility or more work. They kind of missed and that's partly because of the negotiations being behind closed doors, but they didn't really recognise the gender discrimination. So it's possible that, I think that's one of the reasons. And then the other will be the economics. In care and support, we know we have some really big, often the retirement villages and multinational players who are clearly making profits, but they tend to move out of rural areas. They will have multiple chains, and I don't think that these sectors are funded sufficiently. So I do think that some of that will be trying to get by with the funding and cutting costs where they can. Not always nefariously, but because the funding just doesn't cover the kind of care and support we would expect, regardless of pay equity.
Thank you, Katherine.
You're welcome.
Last, Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a really good submission, Katherine. My question actually follows on as a bit of a sup from Sue's, and it is all hypothetical now, but talking about the private sector, under the previous legislation, before the amendments, it would be very limited cases that people could opt out. But under the new changes, there's no compulsion to be in at all, and there's no reason needed to opt out if an employer chose to. And I'm just thinking, particularly in the private sector, how messy could that get in terms of forwarding a really credible pay equity settlement?
If there's no compulsion on employers to be involved, then the settlements can't happen.
Exactly.
So, and then we just have that race to the bottom, that the work, and this work, some of this work is so crucial to we look at, education, health, information, librarians are information system specialists. These are actually all crucial roles to our society and our business world. So in terms of messy, we will end up with potentially workers who have no other option than to work in these low paid roles, which they could be the best workers for that, but then the best workers will tend to move out if they can into better paying jobs. So I think your words messy pretty well describe what could happen.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katherine, for your submission. It was refreshing. Thank you very much. Right, we'll move to our next submitter. And is Janice Burns available, please? Is Janice Burns available, please? All righty. Oh, here we are. Here we have Janice. Kia ora, Janice. She is. Kia ora, Janice. Can you unmute yourself? There you are.
Are we here?
Kia ora, no mai, haere mai. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes. I wouldn't use it just by talking. I'd leave a little bit of time at the end for our panellists to ask questions. Sorry, my camera's not on. I'm having issues with my internet, but that's okay. Yeah, the floor is yours. Kia ora. Oh, the submission's been read, by the way.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I'm Janice Burns. I'm part of a partner in Top Door Consultants, a small New Zealand-based 3-woman consultancy that spent its life doing issues on employment equity. I'm a pay equity technician. You know, I've been part of designing, implementing, training for, reviewing pay equity tools, the tools that allow you to sort of pull apart the componentry of jobs, that then allow you to sort of compare jobs that, while our Prime Minister would say you can't compare detectives with social workers, you can, you know, because you're looking at the componentry. So I've been part of all three systems in Aotearoa, but I want to just go back to the beginning. I want to just reiterate why we started this in 1990, because the multinationals moved into New Zealand, as you've seen in my submission, with their job evaluation systems, the Hayes, the Mercers, the big companies. Those systems were designed in the 1950s to basically reflect current work, which was men's work. And they were often tested in military settings. They remain substantially unchanged. And international and our own analysis showed that they were not including aspects of women's contemporary jobs. You know, and so we set about to, we first of all approached the companies, critiqued it, and then designed our own systems. Both the tools were meant to be both an alternative Indigenous job evaluation system and a mechanism for conducting pay equity, for comparing work of equal value. So that's where it came from. And I think that's important, because one of my concerns is we don't know what the new tools will be that this government will implement in its new programme. But I have a concern that they will go back to these old job evaluation companies as the tool for work measurement. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're measuring work. So I've been involved in scores of cases within organisations, across organisations and internationally. The second point I want to make refers to, you know, the criticism that the system was unwieldy, it took too long, it went too far, blah, blah, blah. I think there were efficiencies that could have been, I mean, I was absolutely in there with the DHB's clerical claim and the nurses and midwives, although I had a slightly different role in that claim. We have built up an amazing database of comparators that one of the aims of the Pay and Employment Equity Unit was eventually we would have a database so that you wouldn't have to keep on doing the comparator work. You could lock into an already evaluated, already sized job, and you're not saying that they're all the same, but they give you some ideas of relative equivalence, and that's what we're talking about. So we could have done we could have had a review and have a think and streamline some systems, but we were never asked. So that's and I mean, there are other ways in which the systems could have been refined. But you always need a tool, a measurement tool, and I think we had one of the best in the world. We are sought as exemplars of good gender neutral work measurement practice, and well, we've been informed by overseas experience. We have also informed overseas practice. So I'll leave it at that and see if you've got any questions.
Janice, we'll go to JP.
Thank you, Janice. I loved your reference to job evaluation in the 1980s being a dark art. And my question was about how our international reputation with our homegrown pay equity tools. You've already answered that. So I'll go to a quick second question. When you read the rhetoric from the government, it doesn't seem there's going to be any middle ground and they won't or can't be persuaded from their position. What do you think it's going to take to find a resolution to this?
Well, I mean, bearing in mind, I'm a technician. You know, I mean, I'm not a and it's very important that I remain independent. I mean, I haven't seen any information to suggest what they're actually going to do, but they will need some sort of tool. And so, what I would hope is that they make that transparent, and we can apply the scrutiny that we've done to other systems. And I mean, we have a wealth of experience here, you know. So I probably don't quite know the answer to that question.
I know it's sort of impossible to answer, isn't it? Thank you also.
Sue.
Oh, kia ora, Janice. Thanks so much for your submission. I don't come from a technical background on pay equity at all, so I'm having to learn a lot. And this question may be stupid, but I'm just wondering, you talk, and I've been curious about this all along, this incredible wealth of research on the comparators and all the interviews and deep research that's been done over so many years and with so much care by so many people and at great cost. I'm worried about whether all that gets lost because of the government's legislation. Like, that's the first question I have around how you feel about what's the risk of that data being lost. But the second part of it is, if best case scenario, we had a government that came in within a reasonably short time and reintroduced pay equity fully, or at least as far as it went before, are those comparators from the past, to what extent is all that information still usable in future claims, like given that there's going to be a lag, even in the best case?
Let me answer your second question first. I think that's always an issue. Jobs change, and female-dominated jobs change as well. But I think there's some very there's some techniques you can use to check. You would have current job information against the previous job information, and you could do an exercise that goes, is this the same? Is it different? How different? I mean, and you could make a decision, have a view on whether it's still valid, really. I mean, and that would be important. And I think even if you had the database I talked about, you would still do some of that practice, but it's not an enormous job. If you've got some work measurement technicians, we can do that.
Kia ora. And then so back to the preservation of the data, like.
Well, I think you've hit a really big problem. When the Pay and Employment Equity Unit was disbanded, a lot of that information disappeared. Which is why we've only got a draft report from Philippa Hall. It just disappeared. It disappeared from we tried to get it into places like the Ministry of Women's Affairs library and so on, but there is a real risk that it does disappear. But it's also because of the tripartite process that was involved in the claims, it's held by the unions as well. So there are other sources of and good records of those comparator evaluations.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Linda.
Janice, thank you so much for your very clear submission. I particularly like your emphasis about the importance of having a measurement tool. And I just wondered if you could talk to the government's suggestion that that things have become too loose, or we're taking into account factors that weren't relevant. Do you see any validity in that suggestion at all? And just comment on that.
Well, let me just go back to the Prime Minister last week said, with an absolute tone of outrage, how could you compare, librarians to mechanical engineers or whatever? It makes me, whoever is advising them, and I have no idea, when I hear these things reiterated over and over again, it makes me anxious that people don't actually understand what measurement for work of equal value is. So I've got a real concern that they don't get it. And was it too? It was too time consuming. But these were early settlement. These were early work. We were, and there's also a real need and compulsion to be so good at it because you just know you're going to get the scrutiny. So I think, the idea about having a database, I think you could do evaluations differently, a little quicker, but that opportunity was never given. We're not stupid. We knew that we could refine this process. The unions, the peak bodies, the employers, and so on. Yeah, we would have been up for that.
Thank you. Kia ora, Dean.
Thank you for your submission. It was fantastic. I can't get how hand over heart we can hear people in the House speaking that we still believe in pay equity. We're supportive of the industries, but have taken away the tools. What, other than your recommendation of a database, what else could we do? Because there doesn't seem to be any understanding in the House from some MPs about what pay equity actually is.
I mean, it's the old rubbish, you know. Oh, you can't compare apples and oranges. Well, I could, you know, I could analyze the skin, I could do the pips, I could tell you about sweetness. I really don't know. I mean, I think there's two possibilities. One is that some people do know, but it's not politically savvy of them to say so. And they did refer to having some advisors. They took advice. Now, I'm speechless, really, about who is giving that advice. And I reiterate my concern about they will pull in the multinational job evaluation people to do that measurement because they're tried and true, you know. But there is inherent bias in both in their design and in their practice. And also, most people don't understand how those systems work. So, which is a complete antithesis of pay equity processes.
Thank you very much, Janice, for your wonderful submission. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Much.
Go well.
Thank you. I'd like to call out the NZNO. Jackson. Is the NZNO there? ND. And Glenda. Here we are. Okay, thank you very much for your submission. Please note, ladies, that our panel have read your submission. You have 10 minutes. Obviously, the longer you talk, the less questions we get to ask you. The floor is yours. Kia ora.
Kia ora. And
Glenda Alexander.
Hi, Janice.
Hi.
Yeah.
Kia ora koutou. Do you want me to kick off, Glenda?
Yes, please, Anne. That would be great.
Kia ora koutou, katoa koe Daniels tōku ingoa. I am the president and co-chair of NZNO, the New Zealand Nurses Organisation, representing 61,000 nurses, midwives, healthcare assistants and kaiawhina who work in public, private, primary and aged care health sectors. I'm also an emergency nurse in the tertiary level care hospital. I just want to thank you for all those involved in giving the women of our country a voice and filling the void of fair, transparent and democratic government process. The fact that we are still fighting against gender discrimination and for equity in all aspects of our lives is a condemnation of successive governments who have failed every woman in our past, present and future. NZNO believes that pay equity legislation and framework must be fit for purpose to give effect to our Maranga Mai strategic plan to fix pay and conditions equitably across every sector of the health system to meet nurses' values and expectations. NZNO has consistently called for equal pay and conditions for every nurse everywhere for many years, based on the irrefutable fact that our professional, legislative, ethical and cultural standards of practice are the same no matter where we work. I remember well when we won pay equity in 2023, I was proud of what our union had achieved. But my remaining non-Te Whatu Ora colleagues have had pay equity ripped from them in the most underhanded and unethical way imaginable. The coalition government's change to pay equity legislation has created division within our profession by increasing pay inequity and compounding gender discrimination. Non-Te Whatu Ora nurses now earn 24% less than nurses working in the public sector. Further, maintaining pay equity, hard won over 6 years of mahi, is no longer protected for Te Whatu Ora nurses under the new legislation. So what does that mean? We are being dragged back to the dark ages where women have few rights or protections equal to that of a man. The impetus for these changes was to save billions of dollars on the backs of women, backs already bent to breaking point with unsafe workloads and unsafe staffing in the public sector and the primary sector and the aged sector that is getting worse every day. As highly educated, skilled and knowledgeable professional nurses, we have choices and we are making them. Nurses are leaving the country in their thousands, leaving our public health system in peril, and those who need our care waiting and suffering avoidable harm, all of which is bringing shame on our nation that once led the fight for women's rights to be equal internationally. Our NZNO members are calling for change. Government must restore and improve pay equity legislation and fund pay equity settlements to correct gender-based discrimination and uphold the mana of the past, present, future women of our country. Thank you.
Kia ora, Anne.
Kia ora.
Lynn, did you want to ask us something? Or
Yes. Actually, Anne, you very eloquently answered my question, because it was going to be about the ongoing impacts for members in our health system. And after I put my hand up, you did actually go into it. But I would also be very interested to know around the resourcing, because we've had a number of submitters who've talked about the time, the money that unions in particular and employers have put into that. And I think you said that the resourcing that was made available was a challenge. And that's retrospectively. And if you could just make a wee comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Lynn, but I think that we have Glenda in the room who would be much more able to answer that question, if you don't mind.
No problem.
Kira, I just wondered if, Kira, you wanted to talk to the other impacts on our, Māori and iwi communities first before I do more of the technical stuff. Is that okay with everybody?
Yes.
Kia ora, Glenda. Kia ora koutou katoa, he uria hau Ngāti Kahungunu Ngātai, ko Kiri Nuku Tukuingoa, he kai whakahaere tōputanga tapu he kai Te Aki o Aotearoa, the New Zealand Nurses Organisation. It's no surprise we've been on this battle for a lot longer than most other nurses, because the rights of Māori women and Māori nurses has been completely undermined throughout the health system. History goes back, and it eloquently talks about the way that Māori women have been treated throughout history. Akinihihe, one of our most famous Māori nurses, never paid for the work that she did, but the expectation was that all of what she was doing was in consideration of bringing up Māori to a standard of non-Māori. So her work was considered to be that of the angels, as opposed to recognised for the skill that she brought. And that's no different with Māori nurses today. I mean, we have been on this battle for many, many years. And if I only look back to 2008, and when our Māori nurses identified the issue around the gap between what their nurses within hospital were getting paid compared to nurses that work with Māori and iwi providers. Back then, the gap in pay difference was 30%. It wasn't just about the pay, it was about recognition of the work and contributions that Māori nurses add to the community. And despite the select committee, which I think gave some quite explicit directions for the government, none of those were addressed. And of course, now we've got a workforce back in 2013 that was 8% of a total nursing workforce population. And now, without any investment from any governments, we remain 7.4 of a total nursing workforce, with internationally qualified nurses almost at 50% of that. So not only have we seen a shift in change in culture, we have seen the lack of value that Māori nurses or governments tend to invest in Māori nursing. There is no workforce strategy, there is no plan. We've tried to look at pay parity as a approach to get these nurses that work within providers up to a standard. However, that was getting us nowhere as well. And when governments choose to not talk to the issues or address the issues or include them in any strategy, our next approach, was to take a pay equity claim, so that not only could we have the gender discrimination addressed, but also the ethnic discrimination that exists addressed, so that the value of the work that Māori nurses actually do was going to be recognised. And we don't have to look far. The Y2575 recommendations clearly set out the discrimination, both structurally within the system, that was stopping our nurses from being recognised and funded. So, as Anne had said, this overnight decision, which did not include and breached the rights of our treaty rights, meant that these nurses will continue to stay in the dark ages forever, because nobody will address this issue of pay parity. It's a struggle for mainstream women. It's even double a struggle for Māori. So if we're going to look at investment, let's look at the impact that this has had on Māori communities, on Māori nurses, and how much that has significantly set us back. Māori nurses are often the role model for others within their families to step up and become nurses. Why would we even bother? That's what many nurses are saying. Why would we bother when we're getting treated poorly, even more poorly than women in general? Glenda, I'll hand to you.
Kia ora, thank you, Kerry. That's great. So the question that I think Lynn asked before was on the resourcing. So I know you've read our submission, so you'll see that we were involved in all 12 of our claims. You heard us speak about the care and support one just last week, week before, and that was 3 claims that we were involved in. We had 9 others raised and underway. The 2 most advanced was Plunkett and hospice for nurses. So painfully, the resourcing of pay equity claims, especially from the union perspective, is a real struggle, because there's also a struggle in terms of having the opportunity to train other people in terms of the process, and the unions themselves are actually resource poor. So you couple that up with the employers who, at least one of our claims, Sexual Wellbeing Aotearoa, they were extremely challenged by our claim, not because they didn't believe it was fair or reasonable, but that they just said there's kind of like only 2 people there working in HR. They had to do all the day-to-day stuff, and how on earth would they fit in progressing a pay equity claim at the same time? So we found this frequently. The Plunkett claim revolved around only 2 people who worked with us. Again, only 2 people from the union as well. So, and we did rely heavily on the Public Services Commission, the Pay Equity Task Force people who helped both parties. The resources were amazing, as was the assistance and support. I think I saw Amy Ross lurking around somewhere on the panel as well. She was really helpful to us, both parties, in terms of training in the resources, using the Te Arawaru tool, those kind of things. So overall, in each claim required at least, I was trying to work it out the other day, at least about 3 or 4 hours a week. And so if you add all that together, weekly meetings just to talk about what we are doing, let alone doing the work, all the interviews that we've repeated and repeated. So picking up on something that Kerry said, for us, in terms of the New Zealand Nurses Organisation, what to us seemed a nonsense actually was the fact that we had to repeat raising claims for every different sort of discipline of nursing, if you like. As far as we were concerned, we proved our case with the DHB/Te Whātua Ora nurses claim. Nurses are all similarly qualified. They just choose to work in a different practice setting. And so having completed that first pay equity claim, we should have been able to just adjust the outcomes to take into account the different settings, particularly the different settings, the overlay of the bicultural issues that we were pleased to see did go some way towards assessing in the Te Arowaru tool. But, you know, like in terms of our claims, we just thought it was a nonsense that having proven the case once for around 40,000 nurses in this country, why did we have to repeat over and over again for all the rest of the nurses, regardless of their practice setting? So yeah, resourcing was a real struggle, and it seemed like we were, you know, like women often have to do, is continually prove themselves over and over again, whereas in fact the assessments and the ones we did do for Plunkett and hospice already showed us that the nursing roles were totally comparable, you know, in terms of just a strictly mathematical, more scientific approach. It showed us that they matched up to their sisters who worked for Te Whatu Ora, doing the same or similar work with the same responsibilities, the same skills, the same effort. And, you know, the only thing that was a bit different would be the working conditions, but on balance, they were the same or similar work. So that's why we're really frustrated, because it has created a double level in New Zealand of nurses who do the same work being paid extremely differently.
Linda, Kerry and Anne, we have one more question, and I will ask Marilyn if she would like to ask a question.
Laura, thank you very much for your submission. I continue along this way a little bit, but I'm really happy to have it an estimate in writing. I notice in Law News, both hospice and Plunkett gave a figure to assess how much staff time, etc., they thought they had spent on their claims. And Tracy Martin from the rest home proprietors told us they thought it was in the vicinity of about $500,000. So I wonder if you can, if you feel in a position to put a kind of a ballpark figure on what it had cost you to negotiate in good faith, to the point where all the claims were lost in the legislation. If it would just be a meaningless figure, then you can just tell me that, and that's fine.
Yeah, I hadn't actually turned the time into dollars, but you know, I would say that it was the equivalent if we took into account, if you just talk about union resource to it, would be, you know, the equivalent of a full-time salary. You know, I'd say across all of our claims, the fact was that it wasn't a full-time role, it was part-time, but I think in actual fact, if you add the whole 9 claims plus our involvement in the care and support one, it would be at least a full-time salary. Yeah, that'd be a really interesting exercise, Marilyn. I'd be quite keen to figure that one out a bit more specifically and let the committee know, because I think it was quite huge, really, when you know, just add, you forget the minutes. If we were accountants or whatever, we'd be clocking them in from my memories years ago, every 15 minutes you'd block in how much you were, you know, spending for which client and so on. Yeah.
Can I just add a comment to that? I think it's could be an easy enough exercise to look at the staff time, but our organisation runs on volunteer time. So the engagement with Māori communities would something that would be really difficult to factor in. But with our engagement, we spend a lot of time communicating and engaging with members so that they are really clear about the process, but also so that we can recognise what is a value add that it takes being a Māori nurse within that sector as well. So I think while some of it can be quantified, it's that unwritten engagement or that would be really difficult. But the volunteer time is huge.
But Kiri, in those cases, narration is fine. When there's no figure, but there's a story. That's cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne, Glenda and Kerry, thank you very much for your submission this morning. We could have you here for a lot longer. However, I have a number of people lined up to come on to do their submission, so thank you very much.
Kia ora.
General, we're going to have a short break for a cup of tea and whatever, and we'll be back in about less than 5 minutes, if that's okay. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Hannah, Megan, Sandra.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Welcome to the Pay Equity Committee, People Select Committee. I'm Jo. Sorry, my camera's off because I'm having internet issues. The floor is yours. You can see everybody's there. They've all read your submission, so go for it.
Kia ora, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Sandra Gray, National Secretary of the TEU, and I'm bringing in the room with me three people far more capable about talking this issue from how it feels on the side of doing all the pay equity work for our union. So we've got Daron, Hannah and Megan with me. But I did just want to introduce them and four other women. I wanted to introduce the Select Committee to the amazing women around me and who've come before me. And hopefully you can see these women very, very well. And I'm bringing these women in. This is my grandmother, Rhoda, and her sister, Maud Huller. Rhoda and Maud were members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union throughout their lives from the 1920s and into the 1990s. And as you will all know, the Women's Christian Temperance Union fought for pay equity. So my family has a long history of being involved. But the other two I wanted to bring into the room are two other sisters who are dear to me. These are my nieces. This is Rihanna and Caitlin. Now, my grandmother and her sister were born in the 1910s. These two were born in the 21st century. Now, the thing about bringing these women in is, why do we need pay equity? These women were fighting for it and their forebears in the 19th century. These women are 21st century women and they still don't have pay equity. And what I'm going to say to you, and I know you're on our side with this, but what I want to say directly to this government is pay equity is not optional. It must be delivered, not just for the future women, but for all the women who fought for well over 100 years for pay equity. Enough is enough. Time is up. Put the money into the public sector. Put the energy into legislation that works. It is absolutely time, and it is absolutely time for all of those working in the tertiary education sector to be paid what they are worth. The women and men who work in female-dominated occupations in tertiary education deserve much better than they've been given. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to one of those women. I'm going to hand over to Hannah, and she'll pass on to the others.
Kia ora. So my name's Hannah Jenkin. I am a librarian at Victoria University and also a branch president. So I kind of just wanted to start by saying that I really love my co-workers. They are really good people. They are intelligent and caring, and they're really good at their jobs. And I think there's a lot of stereotypes around what librarians do. They think we kind of just sit around reading books or something all day. But actually, it's very technical. A lot of the time we are working with complex data systems, we are managing metadata, we are dealing with IT issues, the list goes on. You know, I can't tell you the last time I touched a book in my role. So it's not really what people think. And I actually don't really care what people think of my job, but I do care what my employer understands that I do. Do they know the skills and the knowledge and the qualifications required, and do they compensate me for that? I would say that our employer was really collaborative in the pay equity process with us. There was a really good relationship. My employer is Victoria University, and I know you had Marion Street talking to you in the first hearing in favour of pay equity. But what's happened is our claim's been cut, the funding's been cut, and now while our employer is ethically and morally in favour of pay equity, they will not fiscally commit to it. Which is really sad because it was a really good relationship we had with them, and it's just been undermined by this whole process. And even then, we cannot actually re-raise our claim because we do not now meet the gender requirements. So we don't meet it by 2% at Victoria University Library, even though we work in a female-dominated profession and, you know, nationally. But, you know, having a few more men working with us hasn't meant that our pay shot up at all. But now we cannot litigate for pay equity, and we cannot make it a priority for our employer. I was going to say, all I really want is that my co-workers can look at their paycheck and they know that they are being paid fairly for the qualifications they have, the skills they have, the knowledge they have, and that they are being respected. Because I should say, this isn't just kind of a theoretical thing for us. It's not some line in a budget down the hill at Parliament. It's our livelihoods. It's our ability to support our family, it's our ability to participate in our community, and it's our ability to live with dignity. So I really want pay equity to come back and be competent and effective. I'm going to hand over to my library colleague Dardon now.
Kia ora, thank you, Hannah. Tēnā koutou, and thank you so much for hearing us today. Ngā mihi nui, thank you. So in 2021 at the University of Waikato, where I am, 85% of our clerical and admin staff were women, and in my library that number was 92. So I'm a teaching and learning librarian, and I was covered by one of our pay equity claims that this government has now extinguished. I've also brought with me today 4 of my amazing colleagues who were covered by our clerical and admin claim so that they could actually be in the room with us as well. So we were 2 years into our claim. We've spent so many hours voluntarily facilitating sessions where our underpaid colleagues mapped out their responsibilities. And then through collective kōrero, they began to see the true scope and value of their work. So they weren't just answering phones, filing documents, or issuing books, like Hannah says. They were budgeting, managing finances, providing sometimes life-saving support for students in crisis who felt they had no one else to turn to. They were also handling potentially violent situations alone, teaching classes, instilling critical thinking into our next generation. So they were kind of using their so-called soft skills to diffuse, divert, total, and to counsel, skills that frankly are anything but soft when they're actually holding up an entire community. So many university workers covered by this claim are actually forced to choose between fixing their car or going to the dentist, between renting a healthy home or paying for their counselling. So just a little bit more context, to even apply for most university librarian roles, you need a master's degree, high digital fluency, and actual in-depth knowledge of niche technologies or study areas. We educate the future nurses, teachers, kindergarteners, social workers, and even the librarians. And every day we see optimism and passion in their faces. And we know we are sending them into professions where they will be undervalued, underpaid, and unfairly treated simply because they chose female-dominated work. And if they are Māori or Pacifica, we know they will fare even worse. We have to look them in the faces every single day. And now we know that this government has sold their future under urgency. Our workers gave their time, their faith, and their hope to this process. They learn often for the first time how detailed, complex, and valuable their everyday mahi truly is. And they believed in the process that our government had put in place. And that belief has now been betrayed. So this legislation didn't just end some claims, it actually ended our trust. It told us that our labour, care, expertise, and our dignity were and are expendable. So yeah, to the government, we're asking that they reverse this legislation and reinstate all the claims, and that they actually fully fund pay equity settlements in our sector. Thank you for listening, ngā mihi nui, and I'll pass on to our amazingly technical person, Megan.
Kia ora koutou, ko Megan Morris Takolingua, ko Te Pō Mataranga me Te Pō Ahimahi Te Hautu Kaharangi Aotearoa. So I'm Megan, I am the Education and Industrial Campaigns Officer for Te EU, and I have been the National Claims Lead for our pay equity work for the last 2.5 years. So my part is looking at the more technical aspects of our submission and the barriers that have been put in place by the amendments to the Act now. It's really useful, I think, for us to highlight that our claims, which we did in conjunction with the PSA and TSA, were the first claims outside of the core public service, which is the funded sector effectively. And as such, a number of other unions were looking at us and the progress of our claims to see how we were going. And as part of that process of being outside a core public service, it is really important to highlight the collaborative nature of the work that we were doing with the university parties. So because we had no access to a pay equity team that might sit within a ministry, like for example, the Ministry of Ed had, and also the pay equity unit that sat at the Public Service Commission, which was disbanded just over a year ago. So this work was largely done by union staff and our amazing members like Hannah and Darden, and the university HR teams. The universities receive a significant amount of government funding, around 42%, which is then topped up by student fees, research grants and philanthropic funds. So we knew that going into this process, we would still have to have the conversation about how we fund any settlement down the track. The merit argument, which has been introduced to the Act now, effectively requires all potential claims to virtually prove the merit of our claim before the claim is accepted by the employer. So it kind of means we have to go through the process to have a claim accepted and then to go through the process again. It's kind of double handling. Lifting the threshold from 60% to a 70% female-dominated group over the previous 10-year period sets an extremely high bar and can be seen as a deliberate step to exclude some groups of claimants. And as Hannah highlighted, we were concerned about our library claim because we have a number of people, because of libraries and the fact that they are considered as safe spaces in our communities, number of people who identify gender diverse. So not being able to meet that really binary distinction of male-female. And secondary teachers is the other group that was immediately excluded by that lifting of the bar from 60 to 70%. The other problem is it prevents those with settled claims from raising a new claim for 10 years, and coupled with the restrictions on the review mechanisms, effectively means that the value of any settlement that's been achieved is eroded over time. I want to move on to the comparator hierarchy because there's been a lot of talk in the media about comparators, and the government has, been quite active in that space. The comparator hierarchy is extremely problematic, and it demonstrates a lack of understanding about how the investigation process works and further entrenches pay inequity in female-dominated groups. I wanted to just refer to something the wonderful Peter Craney has talked about. So comparators employed by the claimant's employer must be used if they exist. So if there's no comparable comparator of a male-dominated group within the employer, then we have to look within similar employers. And if they're none available, then we go out wider to the industrial sector group. So I guess effectively what that does is further entrench the inequities that already exist. And it's a bit like the argument that was run in the Christine Bartlett case, where the employer talked about, well, we pay all the men that work as care and support workers equally rubbish as we pay Christine, so therefore we don't have a gender pay issue. So that is effectively what it is doing. And it completely negates the process and reinforces that systematic undervaluation of feminised occupations. It takes no account of the investigation process where interviews are conducted to consider the skills, responsibility, effort and working conditions to draw conclusions about the value of the work. Using comparators from outside of the sector is critical to demonstrate the historical undervaluation relative to male-dominated roles. The removal of our ability to look outside the sector for comparators is not reform. It's a deliberate act to curtail successful pay equity claims. The introduction of mechanisms for employers to bring a claim to an end by way of notice to claimants at a variety of points through the process is also contrary to what I believe the original intent of the Act is. The changes completely disrespect the workers covered by the claims. The incredibly thorough investigation process with data, evidence, interviews and negotiations, which for us have largely been conducted in a really collaborative process with our employer groups. For us, it's 2.5 years of work dismissed and abruptly brought to an end, with approximately 3,500 to 4,000 workers now denied access to pay equity. I'll just close with a quote from a professional staff member, from University of Canterbury, who was covered by our clerical admin claim. She wrote, "I believe equal pay for equal value ensures recognition, dignity and workplace security. On a personal level, the cancellation keeps women undervalued and underpaid. This is modern misogyny." So I'll stop there. I can see that there are a couple of questions. Thank you.
Kia ora, we have some questions. Sandra, did you have something else?
No, I was going to say thank you and lovely to be here, and we'll answer any questions, obviously.
Dame Marilyn.
Kia ora, thank you all very much for your submission, and I'm extremely familiar with how the groups you represent actually keep universities going. I wanted to ask about the role of the University Grants Committee, because when I check on the pay equity updates, in the sector, all the human resource folks from each university's names are there. I also noticed that, you spoke about negotiating with Victoria, for example. I think it was Hannah who was talking about that. So can you just deconstruct for me the position of the UGC in this?
In terms of overall where this sits, the funding model itself now, there's no recognition of equity measures at all, really, not for staff or students. So there's been a really de-emphasising of equity measures. And our employers from the beginning of this process, I'd say, Marilyn, have said there just isn't the money and budget to address these equity issues, even though they agree that we have them. Would you say that, Darden and Hannah, our vice chancellors and the staff they've appointed agree we have a problem? They've agreed we had a case, but they all do that. However, the funding model will not allow us to pay you the way you should be paid. So I guess for us, there's both the process, but ostensibly this is about the state and about the public agreeing that public money should be put in to make sure wages are equitable, fair, and that people can live and don't have to make the choices, like Darden said, between whether they get their car repaired or feed their family. This is not an acceptable position for staff of universities to be in. So we need a fundamental shift in the funding model to ensure that we can lift the wages of workers. Others may not know, Marilyn, you may know, we still have workers in the tertiary education sector on a minimum wage earning less than workers in McDonald's. And this is always excused by our employers because we just don't get enough funding. Not acceptable anymore. There has to be a lift in government funding, a lift in the amount of public money going in, and then Darden and Hannah and the colleagues they brought into the room can be paid properly and live decent lives.
Yeah, but it would have to be some kind of targeted funding to address pay equity. So you can't just have, a bulk increase to universities for them to allocate. It still may mean you're not getting your foot in the door.
Oh, and in my lifetime, there has been targeted funding put in by governments into staff salaries. So there is a way of saying the government will target this funding and it can only be used to lift these salaries. That is not an issue at all. It's been done in the past. AUS were very successful in doing that to get a lift overall in salaries because we weren't comparable with Australia. We would say there is more money needed in that salary bin, and you're right, target it to pay equity.
Kia ora, thank you.
Leanne.
Thank you very much. Look, it's submissions like this that make the kind of value of what we're attempting to do here so transparent, especially Hannah and Dayton. If I hadn't have gone back to university last year as a student, I would not have known the value that you're ascribing to the role of librarians today and what I might have thought about librarians when I was at university for the first time. So I just wanted to say, thank you for doing that, because I think that's the message we need to get out publicly. It's the response to what the government's saying, which is, comparing this lot with this lot, is comparing, as we heard from the last submitter, apples and oranges. And I think it's been really helpful to talk about those skill sets. So thank you to both of you for doing that. And that didn't sound like a question. Maybe if I raise my voice at the end of the sentence. Thank you.
If I could add to that, Leanne, one of the things for me around this process is our own members have sat down and for the first time figured out how highly skilled and valued they really should be, because they often dismiss it. I think that's probably right in the case of, say, administrative staff. Oh, I'm just an administrator. And then they sit down, don't they, Megan, and do the process and they go, wow, this is what I actually bring to my university, to my colleagues, to the students. Wow. And then they do go, and we should be paid properly.
Yeah, it's been incredibly valuable process, I think, for members and staff alike, where we ran numbers of workshops across the country, where they got to break down all the different skills that they bring to the table, and they are part of their job descriptions, or in often cases not part of their job description, just something that they do in their various departments and faculties, etc. So it's been a really valuable exercise. And I think I think the universities are well aware of large chunks of this work, but the issue around, because we were about to embark on the interview process, so we were quite a way down the track, we hadn't got to the interviews yet. So they were waiting to see what that would throw up, but I think we were all acknowledging that there was likely to be systemic undervaluation given what's happened with the settled claims for admin workers and the DHBs, for example. Council librarians were pretty much settled, but then they've hit the same block as us around how do we fund a settlement. So then that bigger picture about how settlements are funded does need to be addressed. There needs to be money put aside.
Kia ora wahine mā. Sandra, Megan, Dayton and Hannah, thank you very much for your submission.
Thank you.
And have a great day. Kia ora.
Thank you.
I'd like to bring to the Coalition Aotearoa, Gabriel Brett Kelly. Yeah, Gabriel. Yeah, where are we? Oh, here you are.
Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora, kia ora. No mai haere mai. Please note that our panellists have read your submission. You have about 10 minutes to say what you want to say to tautoko your submission. The floor is yours. Kia ora rā. Oh, and welcome Helen and Laurie.
Ata mārie. So thank you very much to the Select Committee. It's been a real boost in the arm for us. And I'm welcoming along with me Laurie McNess, who's a disability advocate, and can I see her, Helen Book from the Business and Professional Women. I can't quite see her, but I'm sure she'll be coming on shortly. So we're here, oh here she is, we're here on behalf of PECA, the Pay Equity Coalition Aotearoa. So we started up about 10 years ago, and we are an umbrella group of unions, civil society groups and individuals who really want to get together to focus on pay equity. So Helen's going to talk to you briefly shortly about a letter that we have written to the UN, to the Status of Women. And then Laurie's going to take up most of our speaking time talking from the point of view of a disabled woman about pay equity. And I'm going to pull briefly a comment out of our submission, our written submission, around our recommendation number 4. So firstly, I want to say that we strongly support the submissions from unions that have come before this committee so far. I want to speak briefly about women who are not union members. And so in the early days of PECA, we used to talk about a mythical woman from Te Awamutu who did the books for the local panel beater. We will call her Tina from Te Awamutu. So how does she know that what the pay equity rate is for her job? So our recommendation number 4 is we are calling for the re-establishment of an agency to help employers, unions and employees with education, information and expert resources to develop pay equity claims. And the agency will have responsibility for pay equity data collection and retention. And I really like what Janice Burns was saying earlier about how she had seen that really this database would be refined over time. And we think that best practice would be people like Tina would be able to access that data and check job descriptions, comparators and pay rates to ensure that she and Tawamutu doing books is getting the right rate for the job. And I'll just quickly call your attention to our first recommendation, which is that the women of New Zealand are due an apology from this coalition government for what they have done around pay equity. But I'm going to pass you on to Helen. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Peka shares the concerns of previous submitters, and with thank you to Dame Sylvia Cartwright about the impact that recent legislative changes may have made on the international reputation of our nation. Peka has recently written to the UN Committee on the Status of Women, inviting a delegation to come to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and investigate the impact of recent changes, chief amongst them the amendment passed in May. We feel that this is an important way to encourage our government to consider the implications of international treaties to which we are party, and the possibility, as we assert, that the Equal Pay Amendment 2025 contravenes CEDAW, CRPD and the ILO. In the interest of transparency and consultation, we request that the opportunities to have this conversation with the Ministry for Women and the Prime Minister's Office, and when this offered no success, the copies of the same letter were furnished as well to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Peka has formally requested that the Commission on the Status of Women to conduct a country visit to hear directly from affected women, including Māori, Pacific and migrant workers. And if a visit is not feasible, undertake a desk-based investigation and independent monitoring report, and place New Zealand's regression on the international agenda to ensure accountability for the erosion of women's rights. Kia ora. I will hand over to Laurie now.
Thank you. I'm here today with Peka to talk about a double injustice, an injustice that happens in plain sight, is written into our laws, and is suffered by some of the most marginalised people in Aotearoa, disabled women. We hear a lot about pay equity, the right to be paid fairly for the work you do, but for disabled women, this right is a distant dream, shattered by two crushing forces. First, gendered discrimination. We are funneled into roles that society has systematically undervalued for centuries. Then add ableism. Some years ago, National Council of Women asked me to define, what they wanted a definition for what is a disabled woman. And I said, it is a woman who is disabled by other people's attitudes and actions. And that includes the environmental barriers that are created. So second, adding ableist discrimination, which tells us our contributions are worthless simply because of disability. This isn't just theory, it's law. The Minimum Wage Exemption Act of 1983 makes it legal to pay a disabled worker less than the minimum wage. Right now, nearly 900 disabled people are legally paid as little as $1 or $2 an hour. Most are women. Let that sink in. We have a law that literally values the work of disabled women as worthless. These women aren't just underpaid, they are segregated in so-called sheltered workshops, rebranded as factories, packaging, assembling, sorting, doing work that in any other context would command a full wage. This isn't inclusion, it's exploitation wrapped in the language of charity. And who enables this? A powerful lobby of service providers and businesses whose financial models depend on this cheap, disabled labour. They argue that without this system, these opportunities would disappear. But I ask you, what opportunity? Opportunity for what? For poverty? For indignity? These systems don't just hurt disabled women. It hurts the personal assistants who support us. I've had long discussions with my team of PAs about language, about what their role is, how they would like to be called. And personal assistants on the same level They do all the work for me that my friends PAs do, friends who are ministers of Parliament. And they do so much more, yet they are paid so much less. Personal assistants are a workforce of strong, skilled, predominantly Wahine, Māori, Pacifica and migrant women. Their work, the complex logistics and medical expertise, the crisis management, to name a few, is dismissed as unskilled care. Yet, those exact same skills are used to assist a member of Parliament. Then they are respected, valued and paid a professional wage. This hypocrisy is staggering. The recent government's gutting of pay equity laws has poured petrol on this fire. By cancelling claims and making it harder to fight for fairness, they have slammed the door shut on justice. So what is the path forward? First, we must immediately repeal the Minimum Wage Exemption Act. There can be no exceptions to human dignity. Second, we must redirect every dollar from these exploitive workshops into funding that supports disabled women to real, inclusive, mainstream, non-segregated employment. And third, we must properly value and pay our personal assistants, not as carers, but as the skilled professionals they are. A previous speaker said that we are being dragged back into the dark ages, but for so many disabled people, so many disabled women, we've never had the chance to leave that place. This is more than pay equity. It is about whether we are a society that believes in the worth of every person. And it is about whether we will continue to legalise the poverty of disabled women or whether we would finally choose justice. The choice is ours. Thank you.
Kia ora, and thank you very much for your submission. I have a couple of questions, one from Lynn and one from Jackie. Lynn.
Thank you so much for a really comprehensive submission and also a really heartfelt oral submissions. Very much appreciated. My question is around the your recommendations. Number 5 is around the Public Service Commission, Health New Zealand, developing performance targets for chief executives so that their officials expedite, not constrain or delay pay equity claims. There seems to be some pretty different types of targets going on at the moment at this level. But my question is, do you consider that the officials had a role to play in making pay equity processes more challenging and in the push to change this legislation? And if so, can you tell us why you would think that?
Yes, I can answer that one. Yes, there are a number of our members, particularly ones in unions who've been involved in negotiating or attempting to settle pay equity claims, basically saw employers dragging the chain and slowing the process down. And many of these claims have taken years to settle, and indeed many that were not settled have been in the process for years and should have been settled by now, and those women should, and the male workers in that sector should have their pay, those pay increases safely in their bank accounts. However, it is almost expected of employers to drag the chain on negotiations, especially where they don't get back pay. And so it's in an employer's best interest to do that. And so that's why we have recommended that one of the KPIs is achieving pay equity and completely closing gender pay gaps in their sectors for those chief executives. And then they wouldn't be slowing down. Then they wouldn't, their best interest would be to speed the process through and make it as easy as possible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kia ora, Gabrielle, Jackie here. Very quick question. I was really pleased to see the paragraph in your submission about how women's labour force can boost the economy in a positive way. And you've outlined the ways that can happen, such as increasing the GDP and productivity, poverty reduction, and so forth. Why do you think the government's ignored that sort of fact and not factored that in at all?
I just don't understand. You see all these cafes and small businesses closing down around us because they're really struggling. But of course they're struggling because women aren't getting the pay increases that they thought they could rely on under pay equity. They haven't got the discretionary dollars, the little luxury items like going and having a coffee. And it's so extraordinary that Nicola Willis doesn't seem to understand how an economy works. That actually paying pay equity would be stimulus that this economy needs right now. And we, one of our members from T2 just recently sent us a case study from when the care and support workers originally got their boost from their Act of Parliament that basically put another $2 billion into the economy. And this T2 member was from Southland, and she said her local car dealer did incredibly well. She herself bought a new car on the basis of a huge pay boost that she got from her pay equity wages.
Thank you.
Steve.
Yeah, thank you. And my question is to you, Helen, and acknowledgement of thanks really for writing that letter internationally to ask for some scrutiny in Aotearoa. But also you mentioned that you'd written the letter to the PM and the Minister of Women's Affairs, and I wonder if you sent it to all political party leaders. We're trying to be a cross-party committee here, and I think when you lift up that local political pressure to all parties, which is what we're showing, you're sure to get a response.
Yeah, that was part of the conversation. I just need to check and make sure that that was sent to shadow ministries as well, and we'll certainly be following up, making sure that it goes to all parties. Thank you.
And it's great you did that, Elevation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looks like we have run out of questions for the time being, and no doubt if there are any, they will be forwarded to you in an email. So thank you, Gabriel, Laurie and Helen, for your wonderful submission, and we look forward to those guests arriving in the country very soon. Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I know where. This is consulting group, Philippa Gaines. Oh, there she is. Kia ora, Philippa. No mai haere mai. Sorry, my camera's off. I've got internet issues. And the floor is yours. Committee have read your submission.
Thank you. Yes, ko Philippa Gaines toku ingoa. I'm Wellingtonian, born and bred. As I said in my submission, I've worked in the mental health and addiction sector for well over 40 years. I'm not a pay equity specialist, but in the time that I have worked in the sector, I've had the privilege of including commissioning, frontline service delivery, both clinical and NGO, research, policy for government, and now as a director of this little consulting firm for the last 19 years. And as I said to you, I wrote a document called Fast Track, which was on the mental health and addiction support workforce in 2017. I've got to say this is the first time I've ever appeared before a select committee. So the whole time I've worked in the sector, so I'm a little bit nervous. But that aside, I just felt compelled actually to do something on this issue. The mental health addiction support workforce doesn't have a professional body. It's quite vulnerable. It's entirely reliant on people like me and various professional groups like Platform Trust advocating for them. So I felt compelled to write something about the intent, the process used to push this through urgency and the negative impact on the workforce based on the contact I've had with people that have worked in the mental health and addiction support workforce and the people they work for. So that's just a little bit of intro, the support workforce, as you probably know, arose out of deinstitutionalisation in New Zealand. So it was a small workforce, predominantly in residential supported accommodation, but it's now a large workforce. And given the pressures on the mental health and addiction system, there has been some modelling in various scenarios proposing it to be an even larger portion of the workforce. So pay equity issues are written large across that wish to grow this workforce. In 2017, when I wrote that report, it was 31% of the total adult workforce. It was larger than nursing. And I don't think people realise that. So it's small in numbers in terms of our little corner of the universe, but it's a big contributor to the services that people want and need. Most of them are working within adult mental health and addiction services. At that time, it was about 72%. At the moment, it's about 60%, but that's still a significant number of FTEs. It represents about 3,099 FTEs. The stocktake that TPO, I wrote that report on behalf of TPO, which was the Workforce Development Centre for Adult Mental Health Services, and also Platform Trust, which you've probably got similar submission from to mine. So those two agencies came together and commissioned me to write the report. They noted at that time in 2018 that NGOs were able to maintain employment stability for their workforce, whilst previously competing industries like hospitality and construction really struggled, because this workforce comes from all over the place. Originally, it didn't have to have a baseline qualification. It now does, level 4, and in fact, people come in with qualifications higher than that. They did note, however, that this increase cannot be sustained over time, and in many responses in 2022 indicated various risks, including pay inequities. So this legislation will have real impacts, not just on people's lives. And one of the CEOs at the time of the first settlement said to me, you know, one of our workers said it's not just for her, but she can now send her daughter to university. And that's why I included the comment about the generational impacts for women and their families. So you can see where I'm going with this. It's identified as an area for growth. It's a large workforce, but it's paid the least. And in some cases, support staff are not paid the living wage. The daughter sending, a woman sending her daughter to university, it undermines years and years of collaborative work done around this piece of legislation. And it also removes a mechanism to ensure nationally consistent fair pay. So one of the comments I made in that report in 2017 is that we didn't have fair pay rights. So Pay Equity actually did a rebalancing of the pay scale, even though it's probably still slightly out of whack. And some of that would be down to NGOs not getting equitable purchasing from their funders. So the key points I wanted to make are significant workforce, important part of a transformational change process within mental health. It's fair pay as well as equitable pay, a valuing of our workforce. It upholds people's rights. I just balked at Brooke Van Helden saying any limits on workers' human rights are justified to reduce risk to staff. I just thought that was an appalling thing to say as a minister. Uphold a just and transparent process and restore public confidence and trust in government. One of my ancestors was a woman, Alice Gaines, who signed the suffrage petition back in the day in New Zealand, and my young ones in my family know that I'm a very strong advocate for democracy in our country. So this process really, really balks. I can't explain it to those young ones. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Philippa. Thank you very much. Jackie.
Oh, kia ora. Philippa, you paint a very dire picture of the workforce and its understanding and knowledge of the effects of the 2018 settlement for addiction workers, and clearly there's been, with wage inflation, their pay has gone down and they can't get another review now till 2028. I did had to do some reading around unions and striking because I'm not that familiar, but I understand mental health and addiction workers could strike. I'm not suggesting they should, could strike on health and safety grounds, particularly for their own health and safety. And that paints a pretty poor and bleak and concerning picture with a workforce so spread thin on the ground, being paid less than the minimum wage or living wage, workforce leaving and so forth. And you probably can't answer this, but is striking something the mental health and addiction workers would look at?
I've never heard the support workforce talk about striking, ever.
No, it's last resort. Total last resort.
Yeah. Absolutely. If that started to happen, you'd know you better hit rock bottom, because they're totally committed to delivering a service to people who really, really need it, and they would see the impact of not doing so.
Yeah, but the nurses are striking on those grounds in September for a couple of days, and I know the response from government has been quite scathing. Take that as you see it, but it's very dire what the picture you painted. So thank you very much, Philippa.
Kia ora, Marilyn.
Kia ora, Philippa. I'm interested in the way in which deinstitutionalisation occurred, and it happened really across governments and over a sustained period of time, and pretty fragmented and pretty complex. But every time that devolution or deinstitutionalisation was happening, on the one hand, it was because communities knew better how to provide, but on the other, it was always also because of the fiscal savings that could be made. So have you seen that as just a constant pattern?
I think that's a fair comment, Marilyn. There were fiscal drivers, and I was part of a deinstitutionalisation team at Porirua Hospital back in the 90s. So I was the senior social worker at that time. So I saw firsthand, and we talked about the fiscal drivers, but it also mattered to the people who lived there, some of who'd been there for 40 years, and you would wonder why they had been there for 40 plus years. So for me, the moral imperative, again, it was absolutely the right thing to do, but there had to be the appetite, community appetite, and also the drugs, the pharmaceutical drugs to enable that to happen. So it was all about timing. I think it's no accident that Porirua was left to the last because it was on the back door of Parliament at that time. But many of those people went to live much better lives, I think, in the community. I'm not sure, I think there's another wave, and a very interesting document was released 2011 called Towards the Next Wave. So that asks the question again about deinstitutionalising community structures that we've set up. But again, that would be a rebalancing, Marilyn, with a fiscal imperative, with the right thing to do and the investment in the workforce to do it. But the current model is failing us. I think that's clear. That's why we've talked about what different models of care might look like, and why we'd need extra injection into various skills and workforces, including the support workforce, to do it. It's a long answer, sorry.
No, thank you very much.
Now it looks like we've run out of questions for you at the moment, Philippa. No doubt if there are further questions, I'll send them through to you. Thank you very much for your support.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and I wish you well with your work. It's really important.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call our next submitter, who are from the National Council of Women, New Zealand, Suzanne and Irene. Is it? Oh no, we've got Rosemary here. Kia ora. Do we have the National Council of Women? Do I see anybody? Hello.
Kia ora.
Oh, mai haere mai.
Kia ora, kia ora. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Rosemary Duplessis aho. The National Council of Women of New Zealand, Te Kaunihira Wahine o Aotearoa, was founded in 1896 and for 130 years has been dedicated to the achievement of gender equality as a basic human right. It's an umbrella organization representing 60 affiliated organizations, 300 individual members. It has 12 branches around the country, and our written submission drew on contributions from affiliated organizations, individuals, and branches. It was coordinated by Irene Ryan, who's the co-convener of the Economic Independence Action Hub, which is one of the sets of action hubs that operate at a national level within NCW. She can't be with us today, so I'm presenting on this submission. I belong to the NCW Otatahi Christchurch branch, of which I have in the past been president. And I'm also a member at a national level of the Economic Independence Action Hub. And in that capacity, I was involved in first preparing a branch contribution to the national submission and in preparing the final submission. I've also had a long time interest and engagement with issues around women's position in paid work. I was a member in the late 1990s of the NACU committee. In that capacity, I was involved in research that fed into a book called Beyond the Barriers, the State, the Economy and Women's Employment, that discussed our first pay equity legislation, which was an act that came into being in 1990, and by November 1990, with a change of government, ceased to be legislation relating to equal employment opportunities and also pay equity. In that document, NACU looked at the pay equity provisions, which then related to the form of industrial relations at that time, as both a step forward, but identified certain problems with it and said, if it was implemented, it would need constant review and refinement. So that's the background I came from. That is 35 years ago. So I know what it's like to have a step backward in the progress towards fair pay for women in predominantly female occupations. Now, our submission just highlights certain things, and it operates at quite a general level because that is the nature of us as a national organization representing a variety of different groups. Our concerns with this act relate to it being inconsistent with New Zealand's commitment to the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. CEDAW Article 11(1)(d), and I apologize for being pedantic, states that women have, quote, the right to equal remuneration, including benefits, and to equal treatment in respect to work of equal value, as well as equality of treatment in the evaluation of the quality of that work. The 2023 government report to CEDAW argued that progress had been made on pay equity through the amendments to the Equal Pay Act in 2020. Legislation that actually had cross-party support, including support from our current Minister of Finance, who stated at the time that it would provide better pay equity for women. So there was a time when there was support by people who are involved in the current government for that legislation. The 2025 Equal Pay Amendment Act is a clear breach of the state's obligations under CEDAW and dismantles previous legislation which was directed at addressing long-standing systematic inequalities in the pay of those in jobs done by women. It wasn't perfect, it needed constant review and improvement, but it had those achievements. Our concerns are also that the Act was rushed through Parliament under urgency without a regulatory impact statement, without an impact analysis, and crucially, without the select committee process that democracy requires. One of our members stated, in their submission that it had the features of a dictatorship and not a democracy. We reject the justifications for urgency, and we consider that the lack of transparency relating to the preparation of this legislation is evidence of the undemocratic features of the legislative reversal of a relatively recent set of pay equity regime strategies that had been used to successfully settle 13 pay equity claims. Thirdly, the Act violated the key principle of no retrospective effect, which is a cornerstone of the New Zealand legal system and allows laws to be fair, predictable, and consistent with the rule of law. Dame Sylvia Cartwright, more eloquently and with greater expertise than me, has provided a detailed discussion for you of exactly why that was problematic. The extinction of the 33 unsettled claims, some of them close to settlement, is an abrogation of that principle of no retrospective effect. It appears that this component of the Act was directed at avoiding the cost to the state of pending pay equity claims, and it enabled a budget that included promised tax cuts to certain categories of citizens. That was achieved at the expense of access to fairer remuneration, not perfect remuneration, to approximately 180 mainly women workers. The Act makes future pay equity claims more difficult through limiting opportunities for cross-sector comparisons relating to skills, training, responsibilities, and work, which is a key component of pay equity advocacy and was something that I was involved in arguing for over 30 years ago. The requirement that pay equity claims can only be made if occupations are 70% female for 10 consecutive years will also eliminate many necessary claims. The outcome is ongoing undervaluation of jobs in which women predominate. The Act will have negative consequences for the economic well-being of women, which is a major concern of the Economic Independence Action Hub within NCW, but especially for those in lower paid caring work done mainly by women. 84% of sole parent families are led by women, and many of them work part-time in female-dominated caring occupations because it's consistent with their unpaid caring work. Māori and Pacifica women and women with disabilities are overrepresented in these predominantly female and part-time occupations. Many of them also struggle with being sole parents and the sole source of income in their household. The inequalities associated with an ongoing gender pay gap, which this legislation will perpetuate, intensify for women as they age. Women's greater involvement in unpaid caring work and their lower lifetime earnings than men mean that this contributes to what is called a gender pensions gap. So many of them over 65, when they have access to superannuation, still need to take on low paid, they do unpaid, but also low paid caring work. And they struggle to meet their basic needs. The effects of this Act on women's access to earnings will undermine attempts to address child poverty and will intensify existing inequality. We also reject the claim in documents relating to the justification of these moves that this legislation is consistent with Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Women's lower paid work is predominantly done by Māori, Pacific, and some new immigrant women. And the extent to which this will have a particular effect on the economic circumstances of Māori women was not addressed, and assertions made in that respect are just totally inconsistent with available information. So to conclude, the National Council of Women does not support this Act. It is highly critical of it, and particularly it is concerned with the undemocratic use of power to pass a bill under urgency that has significant and cumulative negative consequences for women in Aotearoa. It is an attack by stealth on the rights of working women and an attempt to silence their voices. we do deeply appreciate the opportunity through the People's Select Committee on Pay Equity to voice our position on this legislation and highlight its negative consequences for women. Open to questions.
Kia ora, Rosemary. Kia ora. We have 3 questions, Sue, Steve and Jackie, and that's how the lineup will go.
Kia ora, Rosemary and NCW. Thank you for such a fantastic submission and all the time taken on it. Because of the nature of your organisation, I kind of feel like you can see this, what's happened through the arc of history, like the whole history of the struggle of women, at least since the late 19th century here. How significant is this attack and that sort of macro frame on women's rights and well-being, like from that kind of historical overview? And within that, I just wonder, in your networks, because I know you're not party political, but in your networks, is there any sense from those women MPs or women in those parties that supported this rollback of whether there's any regret? Like, I know you couldn't name names, you might not know those people, but I just keep wondering, how are those women MPs feeling, and how are the women, the gung-ho women supporters in those parties, how are they feeling? I don't know if you can give us any of that. I'm very curious.
I don't have access to that, but maybe in some ways it's still early days. However, I have tried to point out that we have significant leaders within our current government who had different positions on the pay equity legislation only a few years ago. Now, it is necessarily the case that any pay equity system, procedures for engaging in comparisons and making cases, and opportunities for processes associated with the pursuit of pay equity are going to have problems. They are going to need, as we recognized 35 years ago, they are going to need constant review and assessment, and there needs to be multi-party, multi-interest discussion of those, such as the working group on pay equity that brought together employers, unions, and the government. And this will be necessary in our future as well. So yes, there are always going to be problems. Yes, it should be subject to challenge, not only by unions, but by employers, by governments who have to provide money to meet the claims. But the process of addressing what might be problems by absolutely eliminating a system for pay equity is inconsistent with democracy and is a fundamental setback to strategies to improve the economic independence of women.
Thank you.
Thank you. And my question, Rosemary, thank you for the work you do on National Council of Women, is about process of passing legislation through the House. In the 2020 Act, it looks like the minister at the time said, what is National Council of Women saying about this? What is, other very influential bodies that help shape government policy and acts? Were you aware at all of what was going through in this Repeal Act?
No. It was a surprise. Now we know, when we can see the cabinet documents, the redacted cabinet documents, which is highly problematic with respect to the issues around human rights and this current legislation. We now know that this process has been ongoing for a significant period of time. None of that was made public, and there were no opportunities for any organisation like the National Council of Women, but also other very relevant organisations, to have any input into that process.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Kia ora, Rosemary. Look, I really like the last word from Hospital Administrator Nancy McShane in your submission. There's a lot of activism in New Zealand. CEDAW has, I think NCW has asked CEDAW to visit New Zealand, got unions going to the High Court to find inconsistencies with our Bill of Rights. New Zealand Nurses Organisation, the nurses are striking in September, and there's protests and lots of other stuff organised. It sounds like a sector that's not going to give up.
No.
But we've got rhetoric from the government that can't or won't seem to shift to middle ground. And I'll quote something from Pekka's submission. Really like this sentence: "Hollow political rhetoric should be challenged and resisted. Repetition does not make a lie accurate." What's it going to take for the government to move from their position, do you think?
It's very difficult for me to know. I just think it needs a combination of strategies, and this is why the Select Committee on Pay Equity is so important. It's one of a set of forms of resistance. There is a National Action Day on Pay Equity that is being planned across the country for September 20th. It will follow our recognition of the achievement of suffrage in 1893 on Friday. So here in Ōtautahi, we will be celebrating suffrage on the 19th, and there will be people marching through the streets on the Day of Action on Pay Equity. But that's, it needs a whole variety of strategies, including critical discussion to make consideration of these issues around pay equity at the heart of a national election in 2026.
Kia ora, Rosemary. Ngā mihi nui for your submission from NCW. I wanted to pick up on, through your oral submission and through your written submission, an area of concern that's been highlighted by other submitters, and that is the looking ahead for our retirement insecurity. And I wonder if you would agree with this statement that was made by Age Concern Auckland, and care to add to that. And what they say is that by the mid-2040s, many of today's working women will be nearing retirement. Without pay equity, they will have spent their working lives earning less, saving less, and accumulating fewer assets. As the population ages and the cost of New Zealand superannuation becomes unsustainable, there is a mounting pressure to rise the retirement age from 65 to 67 or even 70. Many women would not be able to continue working until that age due to the physical toll of caregiving jobs on their own health conditions. Would you agree with that concern that's been made by a previous submitter?
That concern would be consistent with our submission, which has more detail in the written submission with respect to issues of aging. I mean, what we have is a whole category of people who are less likely to be homeowners, men and women, as they reach retirement age or go into their 60s in this country in the future. And if they're entirely dependent on national superannuation, and if they don't own their own home, they are living in poverty. And New Zealand has prided itself on its introduction of support for older people way back. It's one of the countries that could be proud of a sense that we supported people in their old age. Now we're living longer and more people are well and healthy and can continue doing that. It's now over a decade since I was 65 and I've continued to be in paid work. But that paid work hasn't been my main source of income. My main source of income has been a contributory pension. And in that respect, I recognize the privilege of that. And we cannot assume that. So people, regardless of the forms of work they've done, whether it's unpaid caring work or whether it's been physical labor, that means that over 65, they cannot pursue the forms of work that they did before. We have to take account of people's actual circumstances and the sort of work they do in terms of them sustaining income through paid work when they reach their 60s, 70s, or even their early 80s.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Rosemary. That concludes our questions for you today.
Thank you very much.
Kia ora.
We appreciate your ongoing work.
Thank you so much, Rosemary.
Right, our next submitters are from Parents Vision Impaired, New Zealand, and it is Rebecca Graham. Oh, there you are, Rebecca. Dr. Rebecca Graham. Kia ora there. No mai haere mai. The floor is yours. Everybody's read your submission. Sorry, my camera is off. I'm having internet issues.
That's fine. Kia ora, thank you for having me. I'm here on behalf of Parents of Vision Impaired New Zealand, and our members are parents or family members of a blind, low vision, deaf-blind or vision impaired child. We're obviously really deeply connected with the disability community and the carer workforce. One of the things that we really wanted to emphasise today is that when the work of the paid caring workforce and paid family carers is undervalued, this has really direct impacts on our families and on our children and on our own well-being. The message that Brooke Van Velden and Nicola Willis and this government sent to paid carers when they cancelled pay equity claims and changed the rules to make it harder is that the work that these workers do every day, bathing, lifting, feeding, supporting someone with dignity, isn't skilled work and doesn't deserve fair pay. We obviously clearly disagree with that. This is skilled work. It deserves fair pay. The original Equal Pay Amendment Act in 2020 gave us a legal pathway for our workers and for our family members to challenge systemic pay discrimination. Pay for carers and especially family carers remains low despite the work being physically demanding, emotionally draining and needing a high level of skill and empathy. By removing and weakening the legal mechanisms for pay equity claims, this government has made it almost impossible for workers in these core sectors to challenge unfair pay. This means that care workers' wages stagnate, and this impacts on workers, predominantly women and predominantly Māori and Pacifica, and their families. Paid care workers and paid family care workers are overwhelmingly women, usually mums. And already, as you know, women earn less than men, 89 cents in the dollar, and less for Māori and Pacifica women. Weakening pay equity laws entrenches these inequalities and pushes women and their families deeper into financial precarity. There are around or over 430,000 family carers across New Zealand. Not all are paid. Many family carers receive only a modicum of support. We provide billions of dollars worth of unpaid labour every year. This keeps families afloat and it keeps a disabled family member cared for, but there is a personal cost here of lost earnings, stalled careers, reduced superannuation. This perpetuates inequities in earnings again and again, and it's women and mums who bear the brunt of this. If we look at the figures for material hardship, from 2020 through, so I'm looking at the last 4 years because that's what we have, the recent data, the figures for material hardship for disabled children has remained stubbornly consistent. About twice the number of disabled children experience material hardship compared to non-disabled children. So that's around 21% of disabled children live in material hardship every day. Around half of that, so the non-disabled children, that figures between 10 and 12%. The reason that we use material hardship as a figure rather than income poverty measures is because of the additional caregiving costs, the additional medical costs, the additional expenses around accessibility that aren't captured in standard income poverty measures. This is not upholding our obligations as a country under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In one of the articles, multiple articles, but to summarise, a core part of that is ensuring that disabled people and their families have an adequate standard of living and the support we need. CEDAW has been previously mentioned as well around eliminating gender pay discrimination and obviously eliminating the Pay Act directly contravenes both of those. On behalf of our families and on behalf of the carers that we employ and that we rely on in order to provide dignifying, respectful care for our family members, we would absolutely reject all the changes to the Equal Pay Amendment Act. We would like to see unpaid caregiving recognised as essential labour within pay equity frameworks. We would also like to see ways explored in how we can support family carers, whether through tax credits, direct payments, or superannuation and KiwiSaver contributions, in order to help address the financial inequities that women in particular face. Ideally, disabled people and family carers should be included in all consultations on pay equity. We cannot emphasise strongly enough the harm that this has caused and perpetuates for families of disabled children. Care workers deserve dignity, fairness and respect. Pay equity is about fairness and values. It is about whether we as a country choose to recognise the labour that sustains families, communities and our societies. The drastic changes to pay equity and the cancelling of the 33 existing pay equity claims, as well as making it harder to create new claims, deepens existing equities and harms the most hardworking women in our society. Kia ora. Thank you for listening.
Kia ora, Rebecca, Dr. Graham, thank you very much. We have a couple of questions from the panel. We'll have Lynn and then Jackie. Kia ora. Your microphone's off, Lynn.
Is it on now?
Yep.
Okay, I'm really sorry. Rebecca, thank you very much for a really compelling submission. And it seems, well, it's obviously a complete merry-go-round that you're facing. You've got obviously the children that need the support, the mums and the whānau that need the support, and a workforce that are undervalued and underpaid. So it's a very tragic story. But my question is that the devastation of these pay equity claims disappearing or being no more means that a lot of carers, paid carers, are reviewing their situations in terms of work. And given how probably integral it is in terms of your situation of having dedicated carers who probably are really like part of your family, is there some real anxiety out there in terms of retention of carers being able to, it sounds ruthless really, but a supply of carers to care for your children and their families?
Yeah, it's a real challenge because carers are so low paid. There's a high churn. And because a lot of government organisations that have the contracts to provide care and support to our families, and so there's pressure on them to employ people at the minimum they possibly can. And so that means that these organisations get a lot of churn. And it's incredibly frustrating for our families, particularly those whose children are older but still need ongoing support and don't cope well with change, to have it, you have it all set up, you think it's great, and then you get a call, the carer can't come in today, the carer is sick, another carer is sick, and the carer that normally provides care to your child has to go and provide care there first, so they won't be in until 11, even though they're supposed to come at 8. And that's incredibly disruptive for families, incredibly disruptive for the disabled person. And it's really frustrating because what this cancelling of pay equity means is that it's going to make that worse. It's going to make it much harder to retain excellent carers. It's going to make it much harder for these organisations that are contracted to the government to provide this work to retain good workers. And sure, you could make the argument that these organisations could choose to pay a living wage, but it makes it really, really hard to get those contracts and keep those contracts and then find the extra money to cover that bit. Whereas if these pay equity claims had gone through, they would have been mandated and the government would have had to ensure that these contracted organisations were upholding the law. And so it's really unravelled all of that in a very significant way.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you for your submission. I noted in 2022 an metrics report commissioned by Carers New Zealand, Alzheimer's Carers Alliance and MSD, they found 1 in 7 adults engage in unpaid caregiving worth about $17.6 billion. And that's a lot of goodwill. How much more can they contribute, the sector, particularly if there's a high churn in the workforce and they're exiting? Is there any more gas in the tank for the unpaid workforce, the families?
Yeah. No. COVID took all our gas. COVID was incredibly stressful, and that wasn't anyone's fault. It was a really difficult time. A lot of families lost their paid support or the extra supports in place. It's been really tricky replacing them. The changes to how you could use your disability supports in March 18 and 2024 have placed an additional pressure on families, and a lot of mums, it's mums, mostly mums, exhausted. We're tired. We get very minimal support. We might get 20 days respite. And by that, we mean we don't actually get 20 days. We get a subsidy to pay someone, which in reality works out to 5 paid days. So it's, there's not a lot available. I am deeply, deeply concerned about the mental well-being of the parents in our sector right now.
We have a question from Dame Marilyn.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think that this has been a really important submission because it is demonstrating that crossover between the old expectation that this was all voluntary labour or just something that the woman was supposed to do, up to, the recognition that to get your GDP up, you need more people in the paid workforce. So now you try and push those people in the paid workforce, but you don't want to pay to replace what they were doing anyway, because of course they weren't working. So I think this is a very, really critical submission to us, just highlighting that issue. And I just thank you very much for doing that. And I think there's possibly quite a bit we can do with some of the information about how a budget might value that work. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I should point out too, people like me in the sector can be in the sector because our husbands or our partners have well-paid work. And those of us who are in advocacy and who are working for organisations and passionate about this, we can do it because we have the support of a partner who pays a solid chunk of the bills. And that bothers me a lot too.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much.
Rebecca, thank you very much. Hilda. Right. Our next are you there? There they are.
Kia ora.
Welcome to our the floor is yours. Please note we have read your submission and you have about 10 to 15 minutes to you. The more you talk, the less we have questions. So it's all up to you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, committee members. Thank you for inviting Rural Women New Zealand to speak to our submission today. I'm Sandra Matthews, the National President, and with me is Nicola Eccleton, our CE. Rural Women New Zealand is a nationwide membership organisation with around 125 active branches and groups. We are a voice for rural women and our communities, advocating on their behalf across areas such as access to health, education, rural connectivity, and community wellbeing. We provide connection, leadership, and practical support to our membership while ensuring their concerns are heard in policy and government decision-making. 2025 to 2026 is our centennial year. which, when we reflect on our history and the contributions of so many amazing rural women, make it even more disappointing to have to address the issue of pay equity. Yet, here we are today. You've already heard from many other submitters discuss the concerns we all have about the rushed process, the use of urgency, the lack of public consultation, the absence of regulatory impact statement, and the sudden extinguishing of 33 active claims. I acknowledge those concerns. They are serious and we address them in our written submission. But because you've heard them many times, I won't dwell on them today. Instead, I'd like to focus on our unique perspective in this debate, the impact of these reforms on rural women and on the rural communities that we support. Rural employers are often faced with difficult labour challenges, including small workforces, fluctuating staff levels, and difficulties in attracting staff. That's part of the reason why the Ministry of Primary Industries developed its rural proofing guidance to make sure rural impacts are considered in legislation. It also has the Ministry of Women's Bringing Gender in framework to ensure policies reflect how rural women experience decisions differently. It is obvious that neither of these tools were applied when the pay equity reforms were rushed through, and that failure has left rural women facing a double disadvantage as women and as rural workers. The reality is that women are the backbone of our rural healthcare, education, and community services, which are sectors already grappling with recruitment and retention issues. Making it harder to achieve fair pay will only deepen those workforce challenges. Let me give one example. The new requirement that 70% of a workforce must be female for 10 consecutive years before a claim can even be considered. For a large urban employer with a dedicated HR team and access to expensive legal advice, that may be achievable. For a small rural education centre or health clinic where staff numbers are small and fluctuate from year to year, that threshold is simply unrealistic. This means real people in real communities could be excluded from fair pay claims altogether, simply because their workplace is too small or too variable. For rural communities, this isn't just about women's take-home pay. It's about whether essential services in rural New Zealand survive. According to the Rural New Zealand College of General Practitioners, primary care nurses in rural practices earn 15 to 35% less than hospital nurses in our cities. That pay gap makes it incredibly hard for rural areas to recruit and retain this vital workforce. Teachers in isolated schools are already difficult to attract. Without the prospect of pay equity adjustments, rural placements become even less appealing. The same is true for rest homes and aged care facilities. One of our members put it powerfully in a survey we undertook to inform our submission. Staff at our small rural rest homes suffered a blow from this. It sends a chilling message to rural communities where the choices are few. People in our cities often have access to multiple options when it comes to services. This is not the case in our rural communities. If the ability to seek fair pay is delayed or denied, rural communities will find it even harder to deliver essential services. I referred before to a survey we did of our members on pay equity. Our members have been consistent for decades on this issue, and they are feeling that the feeling out there remains extremely strong. 73% said they were concerned about these reforms. 69% believe the changes will negatively impact rural women and their communities. And 75% said they feared for the long-term sustainability of rural services like healthcare, education, and aged care. One member also told us that nurses and caregivers in private settings are disadvantaged and difficult to recruit compared to the public sector. Our families will suffer from inadequate care. Another said the ripple effect is huge on a family and our rural community, and that ripple effect is real. It's not just about one nurse, one teacher, or one caregiver. It's about the knock-on impact on the viability of rural communities themselves. People in rural New Zealand aren't just worried about their pay, but about the future of services in their communities. So what do we want to see out of this? Rural Women New Zealand is calling for the government to undertake 4 practical steps. 1, reinstate the 33 discontinued claims through a grandfather provision. These workers and their representatives had already invested years of effort. It is simply unjust to wipe that out. Number 2, lower or regionalise the 70% female workforce threshold so that small rural employers are not unfairly excluded from making future claims. Number 3, provide legal technical support to rural claimants and employers who don't have a HR or legal team to manage the new requirements. And number 4, establish a Fair Pay Commission to oversee claims, gather comparator data, and make the system more consistent and fairer. We understand the practicalities of the situation and that the government is unlikely to repeal changes they made in May. The steps we are asking them to consider won't undo their whole reforms, but they do make sure that rural women and their communities are not left behind. The societal and political changes that underpin the pay equity movement were fought for by generations of women. Progress was hard won, and it's very disappointing to see it is given up so easily. If achieving fair pay is made harder, the result will not only be lower wages, the result will be fewer nurses in our clinics, fewer teachers in our schools, and fewer carers in our rest homes, and weaker, more vulnerable rural communities. Thank you. Nicola and I welcome any questions you may have.
Kia ora, Sandra. And we have a question from Jackie.
Thank you so much for your submission. Really appreciate it. I'm interested in getting some more comment about your call for the government among the number of things you've asked for, but one of them was for a Fair Pay Commission. And I went back to the Fair Pay Act in 2022, which was later repealed, and that didn't propose a commission, but proposed responsible agencies such as MB and the ERA. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on a Fair Pay Commission and other jurisdictions that may use that type of model.
Yeah, so the Fair Pay Commission is something that we've looked at internationally as well. We felt that a Fair Pay Commission would actually give greater scope to be able to include more organisations like what you're doing, and would be a fairer process going forward. Because if we have MB or other government departments, are they talking to one another? And this commission would actually bring everything together, in our view.
Marilyn?
Kia ora, and thank you very much for your submission. I'm looking at the key findings after you conducted your member survey, and really interested in the fact that 34% of the respondents were aware of women in their lives who were directly impacted, but then you've got 73% extremely concerned or somewhat concerned. It's a very, very good submission. I wonder, do you make submissions to New Zealand's Federated Farmers organisation? I mean, we haven't had a submission from Federated Farmers, but these are extremely vital roles in a rural environment. So if I was to survey Federated Farmers, just off the top of your head, would I be likely to get the sorts of proportions of responses that you've had in your survey?
Thank you for your question. So Federated Farmers and Rural Women New Zealand work very closely together. Rural Women New Zealand is focused more on our area of wahine and rural community impact. So when we talk about these types of submissions, we do have conversations with Federated Farmers. I couldn't honestly say what the survey would be like if it went to Federated Farmers, because the majority of our members are wahine. But there also are a lot of wahine involved in Federated Farmers. But we do discuss things, and we do discuss, and it's the same with that rural community lens is actually put on from Rural Women New Zealand to some of the submissions that Federated Farmers may do as well. So we work closely together.
Lynn.
Thank you very much. You more or less have answered my question in answering Dame Marilyn's, because I was going to ask about the wider rural community and how this impacts on them outside of your membership, as it were. But I think you really have more or less answered it. So can I just acknowledge what a marvellous submission in line with all the others that we've heard today. It's each brings something quite different to the table, and it's all just so incredibly compelling. So thank you very much.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Sandra and Nicola. You have a lovely day. Thank you very much for your submission. Kia ora.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for having us today.
All right, that concludes our hearings for today. Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to close the section with our karakia whakamutunga, and then we're all going to hold on because we're getting moved into another room. All right, ka inoi tātou. Unu here, unu here. Unu here ki te uru tapanui, kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairoa, i te ara tākata, koiara e rongo, whakairia, ake ki ringa, kia tina, tina, haumie, huie, taiki. Kia ora.